Public Testnet is finally going live.
It's really a showcase of the technology that has been built.
When somebody publishes, oh, we're doing 10K TPS, and you look and it's like token transfer, it's not interesting because it's easily achievable.
There's a team that sent 3 trillion gas. That's like about 30 days worth of Ethereum throughput.
The launching of Testnet or Mainnet is kind of seen as like crossing the finish line. I kind of see it as crossing the starting line.
We are here for a very exciting episode of The Pipeline, joined by Keone Hon, GM at the Monad Foundation, James Hunsaker, CEO, CTO at Category Labs, Kevin, Director of Growth at the Monad Foundation, and Danny Pipelines, of course. Great to be here. Thank you all for carving out some time to join.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Super excited for this episode. I know the community is too. There's been a lot to look forward to on the technology front, on the community front, on the ecosystem front. Public Testnet is finally going live. Many have worked to contribute to this moment for several years, and it really is just the beginning. So really excited to dive in with everyone here today. Would love to jump right into it and unpack a unique approach that's been taken for the Monad protocol, really building everything from the ground up, from scratch. It's talked about a lot on Twitter, a lot on podcasts, but would love to hear from you, James. What does it mean to really build from scratch, and why is this the approach that's been taken through the perspective of Monad?
Yeah, I think you build from scratch just so you have more technical control over the product. A reason you might fork an open source project is that you can like leverage sort of the ongoing maintenance of that or the work that's already been done. You know, we feel that we would have modified so many things in the existing sort of open source projects that we wouldn't have been able to leverage like the ongoing new features or maintenance of those projects for Monad. So it just didn't really make sense from like an ongoing sort of maintenance standpoint and new feature development standpoint. You know, we can just be very particular about the way certain things are implemented. How is memory allocation done, or how does it interact with the disk, or all these sorts of things. If we're using somebody else's code, they may have already chosen a implementation pattern that doesn't allow for that sort of control. And so yeah, it's just ultimately just boils down to sort of simplicity, control, ongoing maintenance responsibilities, ability to be very particular about how things are implemented to get the best performance. Of course, we use some open source projects. We just didn't fork an existing client just because, as I said, it just didn't make sense.
You talk about basically running into friction if you're leveraging open source protocols. EVM's been around for over 10 years at this point. Why do you think nobody has taken a similar approach to Monad and really looking at this stuff, rebuilding from the ground up and trying to focus on high performance?
Yeah, there's been projects. I mean, they've improved performance in different areas. The Aragon team, for example, have several clients, C++ and Go client, and they made advancements in terms of state sync performance, like how to join the network quickly. Why didn't they focus on like raw execution performance real time? It's just because it's an Ethereum client, and Ethereum is sort of arbitrarily rate limited to this sort of low throughput for various reasons in terms of just having very low node requirements and stuff like that. So it just didn't make sense to really focus on that sort of throughput if it's not going to be used. Monad, on the other hand, was envisioned to be a high-performance EVM chain. There was really no restriction on sort of the design space as far as implementation goes, except for to try to be EVM, 100% EVM Ethereum compatible, was kind of the only restriction that we put there from the beginning. You know, we wanted to really just like leverage the maximum performance of the network and the hardware and that sort of thing. I guess we did try to target like nodes, like consumer grade nodes. We didn't want $30,000 server machines. So, you know, we did sort of set that as another goal, but And it worked out. Like, Monad know you can build a PC that's like $1,000 and run. But yeah, why did other people do it? It's just sort of historical and what their really goal was and target. And it's also just hard.
I was gonna say, it took a team of very smart engineers a long time to build to this point. It's a massive undertaking.
Yeah, it's really hard. Low-level system engineers are kind of hard to come by. You know, they typically work in big tech on like low-level sort of stuff like operating systems like Linux, or they work for silicon manufacturer like NVIDIA, or they work for finance, high-frequency trading firms. It's not sort of your run-of-the-mill sort of developer that's out there building websites or something. So system engineers are hard to come by, and a lot of what we did required low-level system engineering. It's a big undertaking. It takes a certain sort of like skill set to build like high-performance systems. So yeah.
Obviously a challenging road to build this. Obviously requires unique skill set, unique experience. In practice, what have been the most challenging areas, and also what do you think are the most impactful areas of innovation that Monad is introducing?
The main challenge, some of the main challenges are you want concurrent sort of execution. You want to be, machines now have many cores. Most existing clients are single core. Maybe they have some auxiliary threads that are doing some other work, but the main thread that's executing transactions is single core, and so we want to leverage those cores. You do in the block have this dependency between some of the transactions, and so if you have a block with 1,000 transactions, it's not 1,000 independent tasks. There are dependencies in there. So getting that pipelining right, where you're like working on multiple transactions at once, is kind of hard to do. You have to understand the system. You have to understand also the transactions themselves. What are some of the interrelationships? Are there dependencies that you can maybe remove or you can get rid of? And the database is one of the most important components. You cannot wait for disk access. Disk access takes 30 microseconds on up, and if you're just like, if everything's sequential, right, run a disk access, wait 30 microseconds, now do something on the CPU. Okay, you got to run into another disk access, that's another 30 microseconds. So if you're just doing that sequentially, that time, even though 30 microseconds is a really, 30 over a million of a second, it adds up very quickly. When there's many disk accesses per transaction and you have many transactions, that number very quickly adds up. And you're not leveraging the full resources of the hardware. While you're waiting for the disk, the CPU is sitting there doing nothing. The main innovations are really, in Monad, are really about how to execute transactions, always keep the machine busy. Where is it waiting? If it's ever waiting, we try to make it not waiting. We try to keep the CPU always doing something. And as I said, the disk is one of the most common places for the CPU to be waiting for access. So that's why we built the database.
You basically just described the actual technical side of what the community just calls like the washing machine, right? In the docs, when they first came out, there was a washing machine example where you have a washing machine, you have a dryer, and then you have to fold and you have to put them away, right? If you can use washer, dryer, and be folding different sets at different times, that allows you to do way more loads in a much shorter time than if you had to do one load all the way through. It's the way the community talks about it, so.
Yeah, that's pipelining, right? Pipeline is like doing multiple steps of something but across multiple objects at the same time. I think sometimes when people think of parallel execution, they're thinking of like, okay, this transaction and this transaction are running parallel, like this, where actually they might be running like that, where there's like an offset. That's the pipelining nature. So yeah, Monad is a highly pipeline sort of architecture. It's always trying to do something. Of course, there are times when it can't do anything. It's literally waiting on disk for many, many things, and the disk comes back when the disk comes back. But it's never going to be perfectly scheduled, but we try to optimize as much as we possibly can to keep it always busy.
Yeah, I would add that the difference between building a system that works and a system that's really optimized, that's kind of getting at your question of like, why is this hard? Why hasn't this been done before? I was just thinking while he was talking about a really dumb analogy that might break down, but I'll tell you it anyway. It's like, when the Wright brothers like built the first airplane, that was amazing. That was a huge innovation. When they were building the airplane, there were a lot of things that were definitely not optimal relative to how an airplane would actually they got the mechanic to work, like they got the lift coming from air flowing under the wings. But now, like a modern day airplane is much more optimized. There's a ton of engineering that goes into the exact shape of the wings and the, the storage of the fuel and the controls and like all of that other stuff. And it's all very intricate and very optimized. And then you're, doing material science to have lighter materials that actually comprise the plane so that then you can optimize and get further distance. And the lighter the plane is, the more weight can be allocated toward fuel, which then means like you go even further. Like there's all this optimization, and to build that is very, that's like going from 1 to 100, whereas building the plane is going from 0 to 1. And I think we all agree that like there's a huge value in what the Wright brothers did to like come up with a plane. But then this is like the next step is just the optimization of, so many smaller details to make it really efficient. And I think of it like that because when you're building distributed system like Ethereum, the 0 to 1 is really allowing smart contracts, allowing for permissionlessness, allowing anyone to be able to build new programs and upload them and have anyone else be able to access them. That's amazing. But then there's also a lot of slack in the system in the sense that the time budget for a block is 12 seconds. And during that 12-second block, there's kind of like a very rough estimate of how much time it will typically take a computer to execute a little bit of work. There's a lot of slack in that system, but it's like still very much the 0 to 1 innovation that allows permissionless global finance. And then Monad is really about building the performance engineering layer beyond that so that we can get much more performance and much cheaper transactions for everyone.
That would be a fantastic tweet, Keone. If you can break this thing down, that's a perfect analogy. I feel like we're building the jet plane. It's been prop planes for a very long time.
So we've got this massive unlock on the performance side of things. Even with this kind of 0 to 1 implementation of Ethereum and the EVM over the past 10 years, there's been some really interesting experimentation on the application side of things with that. Crypto has millions of more participants now than it did 5 years ago, and let alone 10 years ago. What does Monad unlock for a developer or for a user?
I think that ultimately a blockchain offers shared global state where just like an environment that anyone can build applications and give anyone else in the world access to them. I think of Monad as a really performant version of that shared global state that offers built-in payment rails, built-in programmability so that anyone can build any kind of application and distribute it to millions or tens or hundreds of millions of users that already have assets on chain, already have a digital identity on chain, already have a bunch of other history or applications that they've used in the past or artifacts of those applications. I think a couple of specific verticals where I'm starting to see some traction in terms of applications building. The first is high fidelity DeFi, basically enabling personal finance at scale to hundreds of millions of users and offering really cheap transaction fees for each of those individual users, as well as low slippage coming from the fact that it's really efficient. So liquidity providers can provide really efficient markets and compete down spreads on exchanges that are fully on chain. That's just one specific example. Another area that I'm seeing a good amount of traction is in the consumer space, because any application that is targeted at consumers, that needs to scale to tens or hundreds of millions of users, and that really needs the scale of Monad with over a billion transactions per day.
So it really is quite forward thinking in terms of where is crypto going to go 2, 5, 10 years from now in terms of the number of applications that we'll see on chain, but also the volume of user activity we'll see on chain basically a bet on application builders that they will grow to leverage this performant infrastructure layer. Is that the case?
I think the really powerful thing about crypto is that from an adoption perspective, at least to me, it feels up only. With any startup or any startup environment, that consistency is incredibly important, incredibly valuable. The exact speed of growth can vary through time, but the consistency of adoption, more applications coming on chain, more users getting crypto pilled and starting to move over, funds on chain and start setting up wallets, that is very much monotonically increasing statistics. So although you're right that the current scale of adoption of crypto apps and wallets is a small fraction of users of centralized crypto exchanges or a fraction of users of mobile apps in general, the fact that it's really sort of steadily increasing is something that, what is it they say in trading? The trend is your friend.
Earlier this year, there was a ton of excitement around the DevNet. Would be great to explain to the community how the public testnet is different from the DevNet, and maybe highlight some of those performance benchmarks that were shared earlier in 2024, namely 10,000 transactions per second of replayed Ethereum state.
Yeah, so the purpose of DevNet is just to get early sort of feedback on the system. The way, we're always running Monad internally every day, running replays constantly, like always running replays. We have automated systems running replays, showing us graphing TPS, gas per second, all this sort of stuff. So we're always gathering metrics. Every change, we look at the metrics. Some changes speed it up, some changes slow it down. We're adding features. Sometimes, we discover, there's this use pattern that we didn't anticipate. So we have to go back and make some changes to support that use pattern. So being heavily focused on performance and not always being able to anticipate all the usages. So the DevNet is kind of like a feedback loop from early testers or infrastructure providers on what works, what doesn't, or what's missing that we need to add. So DevNet's been very useful, and appreciate everyone that's connected to it and help give us feedback. All that's been super valuable. It's brought up a number of things that we had to fix, or that we, like I said, we didn't anticipate, and so we had to add. So whereas testnet is a whole other sort of phase.
Yeah, and it's also really cool to see some of the usages in the past of DevNet. There is a team that sent, just over the course of like a couple of hours, 3 trillion gas of usage, basically just simulating a huge number of orders on the exchange that they have built, really complex situations with tons of orders getting updated. But 3 trillion gas, which if you do the math, it's like about 30 days worth of Ethereum throughput just over the course of a couple of hours. And even during that couple-hour period, they were only using a small fraction of the overall throughput of the system. I think they were firing like an order or a transaction every 10 blocks or something like that. Just really chunky transactions with a lot of gas usage. So it's very cool to see through the testing, things happen that just can't exist in other environments. And we're excited with the launch of testnet to see a lot more of that in the wild, and a lot of individual users that are testing things out as well, testing all these applications.
Before jumping directly in the testnet, James, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this general area, but I've used a bunch of testnets in the past. People like to talk about transactions per second on testnets, but really people kind of move the marks on what they're measuring in such different ways that it's hard to know what's real and what's fake. I know using Ethereum history to replay on DevNet is very much done on purpose to simulate what do things look like when there's real users on chain doing things. So yeah, I think if you could break down kind of why you use Ethereum history instead of just sending a bunch of token transfers back and forth, or talk about benchmarking in a way, I think that would be pretty interesting.
The simplest thing for a blockchain to do is native transfers. So if you look at early Ethereum history, It's just accounts sending ETH around to each other. That's like the easiest thing for the blockchain to do. So, even a single-threaded client on early Ethereum history, the state is relatively small. For example, Silkworm, as I mentioned on the Aragon project, is one that we used to benchmark. It can do 50K TPS, no problem. Like single core, no fancy database, no nothing. So when somebody publishes like, oh, we're doing 10K TPS, and you look and it's like token transfer, it's like, that's actually not. I mean, maybe some people are wowed by that, but I'm not wowed by that. Because I've seen it like even not so optimized clients or not parallel execution clients do 50K TPS on the sort of artificial benchmarks, right? So, and then maybe the next sort of level of complexity is like your ERC20 contract, where it's not native token, but it's basically, an ERC20 has like a map of your address to a balance. So, it says, okay, Danny's address has this many, wrapped BTC or something, and interns has another one, and so this sort of thing. And then, okay, you're transferring, it's just like updating these states, but it's mostly in like one contract or a few contracts. So again, that's a little bit more taxing on the system than a native transfer, but it's still a relatively simple sort of thing. So like what happens on real Ethereum, you have like your AMMs, you have all different sorts of protocols, lending protocols, all different sorts of things that are more taxing. And then especially taxing recently is, you have sort of ZK sort of stuff that's extremely expensive. There's a period in recent history, like a year or two ago, I can't remember, where there was a certain sort of like ZK proofs that people were publishing to Ethereum. They don't do it anymore because it's extremely expensive, but these transactions were like $500. It's just extremely expensive to execute. So even we're trying to optimize that sort of stuff, although we don't necessarily anticipate those transactions on Monad in early days, we're still replaying, and those are like real things that could appear someday. And we're trying to still always pushing and trying to get the TPS and gas per second up while dealing with these sort of like very expensive computations. So yeah, I just don't think it's that interesting to do, say we have 10K TPS of token transfers or something. Like, I think it's not interesting because it's easily achievable. That's why we benchmark. We set the goal high of like, this is real usage. So we want to be able to handle real usage.
I would just add that there's a lot of misleading marketing in the space overall, and without naming names or accusing specific projects, I just think that there's a lot of different ways to put the finger on the scale, and the nature of the transfers or the transactions is definitely one. The hardware that's actually used to do benchmarking is another. The geographic location of nodes and real stake weight distribution is another one. There are tricks that people do where they maybe have nodes everywhere, but all the stake weight is in one location. So then the nodes that are not in that geographically co-located location actually don't really matter to coming to consensus and finalizing blocks. There's a whole lot of complexity and effort that goes into building a robust system, not only from an execution perspective, but also from a consensus perspective. Our team has done a lot of work on optimizing the consensus aspect as well, the way that blocks are propagated throughout the network while having still reasonable bandwidth requirements and Byzantine fault tolerance for the robustness of the block propagation. All of that while also being efficient. There's a lot of really interesting work on that front as well. And the way to cheat is just to have all the nodes very close to each other, or have a small number of nodes, have really high hardware requirements or high bandwidth requirements, and we just reject that practice because we're really, Monad is a technology project, and the thing that we really enjoy is working on these new technologies, bringing them to market, and really pushing the decentralization performance trade-off curve forward substantially. It's just not very satisfying to tune a bunch of parameters, and by tune I mean turn to the right a bunch of parameters just to get more performance. It's really about using technology to make decentralization more performant.
There's a lot of false marketing. So there's people who are doing it intentionally, and then there's people who don't know any better, and they're just repeating like what they've heard. But to Keone's point of like stake, like, you know, you could throw up a graph of nodes all over the world, but if you don't put the actual information of like where the stake weight is sitting, you know, so if you have like a BFT sort of like 2f+1 algo, like if you put all the stake in one spot, like that core set of nodes are dragging the geographically distributed nodes forward, like literally dragging them. So yeah, there's all sorts of games you can play and misleading sort of marketing. I would say we kind of go the opposite direction, where we intentionally set up like a highly stake weighted node in Singapore or a highly stake weighted node in New York and see how the algorithm performs. We're trying to break that and trying to set up these conditions which, you know, other chains would not necessarily perform well, and try to see if we can optimize these sort of worst case conditions. You know, any blockchain should be decentralized, so, you know, where the stake ends up is where the stake ends up, but we have to test all these sort of possibilities, be able to achieve the performance. And then there's a certain aspect of just physics, like it takes this much time to send data to Singapore and get a response. And so like nobody can avoid that. You should question metrics where it seems like the chain is violating the laws of physics, right? Because if they're violating the laws of physics in some way, then they're probably in this sort of one of these scenarios where they've arranged things in a not very decentralized way to achieve performance or to show certain metrics. So,
Well, we do. Keone mentioned bringing products to market. Tomorrow we have the first kind of public product everyone can come in and use, which is pretty exciting. There might not be a good answer to this, but you know, the Category Labs team has done a ton of robust testing to make sure, you know, in a bunch of different fringe edge case scenarios, Monad stands up and still works. Are there any areas you think by like releasing Monad Public Testnet to anyone to be able to come use permissionlessly that like you are looking forward to seeing? Like one example, and this could be a dumb question, but one example would be, all right, you have 100,000 concurrent people trying to send 100 transactions per second, just token transfers. Like how many can it do? You know, the community's geographically spread out. Or let's see what happens when everyone slams an NFT mint at the same time. Are there any of those things that maybe they're harder to simulate, but like once a bunch of real users are using it, you're like looking forward to getting some data or information on?
yeah, we can't anticipate everything. So I'm sure somebody will, or just naturally something will occur that is not something we anticipated. Hopefully Monad handles it gracefully. And you know, but we'll always be looking at the data and trying to further optimize things. You know, like replaying Ethereum history is probably the best sort of test that we have, but a high throughput chain might have slightly different sort of characteristics. Would really like to see like an NFT mint, like you mentioned, or something like super high stress, everybody slamming the system, and not have to make excuses why it's not standing up. Or, you know, you always see these sorts of things like, oh, the RPC thing failed, or transaction getting reverted, or all, you know, there's all these sorts of things that pop up on Twitter when something goes wrong, and it would be nice to not have to make those sort of excuses on why things went wrong. So, you know, of course there is a limit. So I think the interesting sort of thing is like when you get close to the limit, does the system like gracefully sort of handle that and degrade sort of gracefully, or does it just like fall over, or do people start having a bad experience? I think you'd be happy to try to do an NFT mint and maybe your transaction goes through 3 seconds later, so, you know, a few blocks later, rather than you get some weird error on the RPC through the wallet or web page or something, and you're like, what the hell? And you start to get frustrated, and you keep hitting, you know, I've been there sometimes where I just keep hitting submit, just hoping the transaction will go through. And finally I give up, and then maybe try a few minutes later or something again. But that's not like graceful sort of like degradation of the system. So it's just going to be an ongoing sort of work, and it'll be interesting to see that sort of usage patterns and try to deal with them.
Yeah, that was basically like the entirety of at least my user experience on Solana in the fall of 2021, which is never something that you really could have like anticipated in advance, like that, Solana Monkey Business and DGen Ape Academy and some of these other collections were going to catch the viral wind that they did, and then you're going to have people from across the globe just absolutely spam clicking mint buttons. Overall, I would say it's a net positive for crypto, but it seems like you inevitably run into those scenarios that you look back on and say, how could we ever have anticipated that playing out exactly as it did?
I'd be curious to see AI agents on the testnet also. The combination of like AI and like high throughput could yield some interesting results. Maybe if we incentivize the AI agents to crash the testnet, they'll, do what they do. Because you're talking about humans clicking. I'm thinking about robots clicking.
Right. Robots definitely click more.
There will certainly be AI agents on public testnet, even if I have to launch it myself. But a lot of anticipation around that side of crypto right now.
Or like inscriptions. There was this period where inscriptions were very popular on every chain and knocking down every chain. So proof of work coins on the proof of stake network.
Yeah, there's multiple layers. Like there's the RPC sort of layer, there's the validator layer. Monad as a leader-based protocol, so you have the leader, and so you have the distribution network of proposals and votes, and any of these sorts of things can go wrong. But I think sometimes you'll see like different parts of the stack will fail, and the user doesn't. Most users don't know, like they don't care that this part of the stack failed, that part, all the core thing held up, but yeah, you still couldn't submit a transaction. Well, who cares? Like, it's still unusable to me. So like, if I'm standing at the checkout aisle, my Visa doesn't work. Like, I don't care whether it's Visa's database that failed or Visa's network that failed, or like all these sort of like excuses or explanations. Like, if you have to tell a story, you're probably already screwed at that point. Like, you shouldn't have to tell a story. It just works. So I anticipate we will run into issues, and we'll just have to beef up those parts of that stack and try to, like I said, just deal with those situations gracefully.
This question probably will invite different answers from each of you, but what is the goal of public testnet?
Well, from a technology perspective, from Category Labs perspective, it's just to exercise the technology and get more feedback on the client and just see where is the client lacking or like performance, like I just said. It's the real world sort of usage of the client to see where is the software strong, where is it weak, what work needs to be done. So yeah.
And now Keone, on the foundation side of things, looking at growing and enabling an ecosystem of builders and community members, end users as well. How do you think about public testnet from a goal perspective, and how should the community of users think about it as well?
Yeah, it's really a showcase of the power of the technology that has been built, and a showcase for a lot of applications that have been built on top of Monad that take advantage of this performance. I also think it's just a good way to have some excitement in the crypto space in general. I think that the community's been waiting a long time and is really excited to play around and see what's enabled by performance. And I think it's kind of just an opportunity to start on a high note and go even higher in terms of the overall growth of the space.
Yeah, I think about it selfishly. I just get asked all the time, like, oh, well, what about this chain? What about that chain? It's like we've been talking, in my head, it's like we're like racing a car or something. And everyone kind of has their car and it does X, Y, Z, where ours is in the garage. And so we talk about Mono, we're like, it's going to be really fast, it'll be cool. And everyone's like, all right, we'll race it. And public testnet to me is like the first time that it actually goes up to the line and people get to see what it does in the real world. Like everyone can run whatever test they want on it. Anyone can go out and use it and see what it feels like. And then, yeah, I think on the builder side, right, like we've been talking to teams for a long time about building on top of Monad, allowing them to put their app out to the public and like get user feedback, see which things break down kind of in the jungle or the wild when real people want to use their apps and do whatever they want to do. I think there's going to be a ton of growth in the ecosystem over the course of Public Testnet for the teams that are currently building on Monad because they're getting all this feedback and making their products better. And I think once people see what this actually does in the real world, it's also going to attract a lot of people that maybe were waiting for Monad Testnet to go live. They're going to come in, check it out, and then it's going to become very clear and very apparent to a lot of people in crypto that this is real, this is going to launch, and it's a great place to come and build if you're looking to push the limits of what's possible in crypto.
Yeah, on the application side, it's been really exciting to see many teams from across the EVM space and beyond committing to deploy on the public testnet, some even interfacing with the DevNet, as well as net new applications overall, some of which are enabled by Monad's performance. Keone, you mentioned high fidelity DeFi and consumer facing applications as two kind of broad buckets that are supported by Monad and that you're excited to see some applications coming out of. Are there any specific applications with experiences on the public testnet that you would like to highlight, or even kind of specific verticals with underneath those broader umbrellas that you think are really exciting, not only because they take advantage of Monad's performance, but perhaps because they introduce something new to the crypto user?
Well, first of all, I think that we all can agree that simplifying the user experience is extremely important, and that means abstracting away the process of paying gas fees. We're just seeing more generally with a lot of applications we're talking to, they're interested in sponsoring gas and simplifying the user experience. So that means that the application typically will be taking on the responsibility of paying for gas. And so naturally, that means that it's important for that gas to be really cheap so that that cost is not a significant burden to the application developer for scaling. So I think that if you think about it from it's a very from first principles answer, but I do really think that it's important to have that underlying mechanic in mind, because if it's a lot cheaper for application developers to sponsor gas, then they're much more going to be able to do that and much more going to be able to build a sustainable business model if they've fixed the cost side of the overall cost versus income aspect of the business. So that's the first thing that I would say. The DePIN space has a lot of examples of this where you might have a huge amount of potential usage, but it's pretty price sensitive. If it's a fraction of a cent to push some data to chain and memorialize some bit of data that then becomes part of a broader data market, that just becomes a much, it really lowers the cost of entry and unlocks new kinds of business models. So, examples of this are marketplaces for health data, marketplaces for generally any sort of devices where there's a whole bunch of consumers that are utilizing hardware that they already have, whether that's compute, either CPU or GPU, cameras, just the broader spectrum of a network where many consumers can connect to the network, maybe utilize resources that they have already and contribute those to a broader marketplace that's consuming either the data or the compute that's unlocked there.
James, I know you're going to be using the testnet. You're mostly focused on the builder side, which I can definitely appreciate, but maybe some in the community don't know that you're a crypto user as well. What are you going to get up to on the public testnet?
I'm a big fan of different protocols, finance protocols. I don't actively trade stuff anymore, but yeah, some of the DeFi, lending protocols and that sort of stuff. I'm a big fan of. Use on Ethereum mainnet. So yeah, I am a regular everyday user of Ethereum mainnet, and so I kind of know, yeah, like what's out there, but
James is actually GCR.
so yeah, I feel if I say the exact protocol names I use, it would be like maybe favoritism or something. But yeah, that is a good point, though. I do think a lot of people who build in the space don't actually even use crypto. I hate to say this negative thing, but you can just see sort of the design decisions that are made and different things. And I'm like, there's no way you guys actually use this, because you wouldn't. If you actually used it, you wouldn't build it this way. Some protocols are fragmented across, mainnet and multiple L2s, or they try to integrate with something that's on another, maybe on mainnet or another L2, and it's just very painful. And there's no way that you're going to get sort of general adoption with the steps that a person has to go through to actually use these things together. I know there's people that working on making that more seamless, but it's still a long ways away. And I could give real concrete examples. I don't want to name and shame people right now, but there's it just doesn't. A lot of this stuff just doesn't work. If you're fine with sticking in one particular realm, maybe it's not a big of an issue because you're just there. But if you're actually moving around and using different things, the current setup is just very painful.
Yeah, I feel like, one question that I get all the time, I'm sure a lot of you guys do as well, is like, okay, Monad's going to be super fast, super cheap. Like, what new apps exist there? Or like, what new apps can exist? And I feel like some of them are predictable and some are unpredictable. To use Keone's plane example from earlier, it's like, all right, you create the first plane, and then you think, okay, if we optimize it more, like, what can we use it for? And it's like pretty predictable. You're like, okay, immediately there's like military applications, people can go and drop bombs. And like, if you make it even better, eventually you can fly other people around the world. So like commercial flights, like transportation, like it's a pretty predictable path for, okay, if you make it better, faster, stronger, then this gets enabled. And there's a lot of things that exist like that for Monad, right? Like DeFi will just be way more efficient. Like even the same code running on Ethereum, put it on Monad, will be way more efficient. High fidelity DeFi is maybe like a new use case, but kind of in the same vertical, same vein. Consumer facing apps like currently exist in crypto, now you'll have more scale. But there's also like the unpredictable side, to me, is what's most exciting, because you have like the internet, for example, 2000, it's like web pages and email, and that's kind of what most people use it for. You speed up like bandwidth by a lot, and all of a sudden, like no one really predicted that YouTube would be a massive thing, or Instagram. Like the ways that we use the internet today, no one really predicted before, but they're the most important things. And so people kind of get inklings, like the AI agent stuff coming up now, like wasn't really predicted, but it is exciting, and a lot of people are experimenting there. I do think there's going to just be new things that it's hard to say with certainty right now this is going to exist, but it'll just grow and capture attention, and people will use crypto for that. And it will be enabled from the tech stack, right? Because it's faster, because it's cheaper, and because way more developers can use it, being EVM compatible. I want to see like what Ray J comes up with on the unpredictable side, and what people start doing there on testnet.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see for sure, and just exciting in general to have Monad finally publicly available. I mean, there's been a lot of people from around the world supporting on various aspects of its growth and development, even in these early stages. Both of you have been working on various aspects of Monad for several years now. So you're probably the best people to ask this question of, what do you feel is most misunderstood about Monad, at least at this current stage?
Well, I just think that people have seen a lot of launches in the past, and there isn't, and part of this is because from a compatibility perspective, there are a lot of EVM compatible chains. The interface is by design the same. The same apps can run. I think that a lot of people, well, I don't want to say a lot because I do feel that the community has been incredibly supportive and excited and loyal, but I do think that there's probably a lot of people that haven't had the opportunity to get involved in the Monad community up to now, because everything up to now is purely off-chain. Like everything up to now is has been about hanging out in Discord or making friends in Telegram or making friends on Twitter or having a lot of fun with memes and Mon animals and going to IRL meetups and improving skills by having an audience and by learning from other people. And that's all been really amazing. I'm incredibly grateful to the community members for bringing so much energy and life into the project. And I think it really is an incredible start and really bodes well for the future. And I don't expect those things to go away by any means. I think that the friendships that have been made and the many groups that have formed that have a specific interest in mind, whether that's Quantico or the Monad Run Club or Iron Nads or people like just getting together from so many different regions, like all that'll continue. But I just think that there's like maybe another group of people that are very terminally online and terminally on chain that haven't had a chance to interact with Monad as much because their form of being in crypto is all about trading or all about using new apps, all about doing stuff on chain. So I think that the exciting thing is that the testnet is really the first opportunity to showcase that we've brought something new to the table for these users and provide new opportunities to get involved. I think that there's the memes out there about someone claiming that the Monad community is all people paid $5 per day to just chat in Discord, which is really funny. And like I think the community has appreciated all of that minor FUD because it's actually really entertaining. But yeah, just to say that the overall Monad project in a couple of years it'll be a really big effort that can help grow the crypto space a lot. And a lot of that is going to come from the applications and the new opportunities that are unlocked there. So I just think that that's, this is naturally the time when that starts, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I think the launching of Test Center Mainnet by a lot of protocols is kind of seen as like crossing the finish line. Not all of them, but many just don't really do any innovation or any sort of growth after that. I don't want to comment on like prices or anything like that, but you can kind of see that just like that is the finish line. Like launching network is the finish line. I think from my view and for the client getting out there publicly, it's just, I kind of see it as Category Labs, like getting the client publicly is the crossing the starting line. Like we have so much, just a massive sort of like queue of ideas, ideas in terms of optimizations we can make. We already have some things we want to rewrite because we know we can do it even better than we did it the first time. We have things that we haven't done yet that are optimizations that we'd like to put in place. We have research, ongoing research. There's a lot of new features for usability, for privacy is a big one, more decentralization. The client is going to support hundreds of nodes when it launches. Obviously, that needs to be thousands to be on par with Ethereum and Solana. So that's kind of like we have to do it. We kind of have a plan, so we have to do it. We just haven't had time to do it yet. There's a lot of just innovations across a number of different areas in terms of usability, account abstraction, all these sorts of things, right? So this is really just like the base layer of what we're starting with. And so it's really just like, for us, it's just crossing the starting line, not the finish line. Many, many years of innovation and work to put into the client going forward.
Yeah, and we're not strangers to working on something for a very long time because, James and I met in 2014 and worked at Jump Trading for another 8 years after that, working on kind of the same thing for most of that period of time. And it was just an evolution of this trading system that was really performant. We reinvented it several times. It's not like we have a very long-term vision for what we want to accomplish, and the mainnet and the testnet really are just the start of that. There's so much to do, but it would be pretty boring, honestly, to just launch the mainnet and then stop, because there's so much, like everything up to now is really just about delivering high performance and full backward compatibility for EVM and for the RPC, so that can unlock a lot of use cases and a lot of builders, and that alone is, we think, very impactful. But then there's all these really fun additional improvements that we want to work on. So yeah, I just would echo what James said in terms of the long-term vision and goal. I also think that in crypto there's something a little bit confusing, which is that people often say that technology doesn't matter, or they'll say that go-to-market is more important than technology, and then they'll sort of use that to justify the idea of like taking an existing code base and then forking it and slapping on a different go-to-market strategy on top of that. And I think that that's sort of the reason why there's a lot of mainnets where there isn't a lot of technological innovation from the mainnet onward, because there also wasn't a lot of technological innovation before that either. It's just like all this pattern of like, we take some software and then make some minor changes and then focus on the ecosystem side or the marketing side. And I just think that they're like two sides of a coin, but by bringing real innovative technology, actually multiple new technologies to market, that's just the start of a much broader effort that can really make an impact in terms of the overall adoption of crypto.
This has been awesome. Kevin, I'll throw it over to you to ramble a bit before we get into the final question for tradition's sake.
Ramble about the final question.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
The normal playbook.
The normal playbook. So Keone's been asked this question multiple times now at this point. James, I believe, or it might be your second time, but we do something on the pipeline called the Final Alpha. And the Final Alpha, as Danny mentioned, I'll ramble for about 30 seconds, allow you to think of something. Keone, you're going to have to go down your list of Final Alphas to find whatever your answers to this one is going to be. No repeats. Final Alpha is really just like, it's any lasting thought that you would like to leave for the podcast. It could be, a recipe that you like, right? It could literally be something your mom told you when you were 8, it stuck with you, and it's been like something that you just remember. It could be a health tip. It could be something you're excited about in crypto. It could be about Monad. It can really be about anything that you like or you hold true to yourself. We've heard quotes. We've heard, look for asymmetric opportunity in other places where it doesn't exist. We've gone all the way across the bell curve with all types of answers. But yeah, just one lasting thought to leave the podcast with. Keone, you're more experienced in the Final Alpha, so I think I will kick it over to you first.
One of my history teachers in high school would say who you marry matters more than what you major in college. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, just in general. Of course, who you marry is the most important thing, but People matter a lot. People matter more than pretty much anything else. Surround yourself with good people.
Shout out Mr. Pipes, engaged.
Oh, thank you.
Drawing a blank. I mean, I would say a lot of my thinking is heavily influenced by movies. If you can sort of place yourself in that situation, I don't know what the exact term for that is, empathy or sympathy, or I don't know, one of these things where you can like put yourself in that role. You can kind of like live through the movies. I always think of like Einstein's sort of thought experiments, right? Like he did a lot of experiments basically in his brain. Didn't have access to all the modern things that physicists have access to with lasers and being able to measure and doing all these experimental physics, right? Which they've been doing for many, many decades, experimental sort of physics to prove that Einstein was correct or wrong or this sort of thing. And I always kind of thought as movies as sort of another way of doing thought experiments. Like, what if I was that guy at that moment and with these circumstances played out, like how would you sort of react? And in a way you can sort of live more than you actually live, and you gain that sort of experience. And so that you wouldn't gain if you waited for that experience in reality. I'm not really a big fiction reader. I think probably like the last thing I read was like Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, which was probably like 20 years ago. So like I'm not a big fiction reader, but that probably has a sort of similar effect where if you can put yourself in that role, you can kind of do that thought experiment. So yeah, I don't know if that counts as a final thought, but
Definitely anything goes. We've heard recipes before. We also, James, I didn't realize we very much have that in common. And mine is to the point where I've made like, at this point, over 100 videos of different movie scenes of like things that happen in crypto and you're the main character and running through. Because like I'm reading things and different scenes from movies are popping up in my head. It's like, oh, this is actually just like that. To the point where I can't turn it off. Like I'm sure this is just gonna run like forever for the rest of my life. But
I think if you have a big database in your head of like all the movie scenes, like I probably own like, I don't know, 600, 700 movies, and I've watched most of them at least 5 or 10 times. Like almost any interaction that you kind of go through in your life, you can find an equivalent movie scene or even multiple equivalent movie scenes. And you know, this is what the author or the playwright or whoever did it, they went through that in their head. And so you can kind of like play it out and you can see how things will play out. And yeah, it's just everything. I think everything's been done in movies. Like there's probably not a real world sort of situation that hasn't appeared in some movie at some point.
make me want to watch Spider-Man 2 tonight so I can be Spidey.
You have probably every film that was produced between 2001 and 2009 not only memorized, but analogized on the pipeline already across our 35 episodes. And I rarely participate in Final Alpha, but I will participate today.
Danny Pipes
An
Final
exclusive Final Alpha, which is specifically related to testnet for the Monad community. Go try out the testnet. You can think of it like a new city is opening, and there's a ton of opportunity in this city. You need all sorts of people to help grow projects, grow their communities, man their discords, make them fun, capture attention through memetics and just having a good time on Twitter Spaces. They need engineers from the lowest level up to the most senior level. They need out-of-the-box thinkers, and there's a ton of really, really bright teams that are building on Monad. And for this city to, reach new heights, to achieve something that's never been achieved before, everybody has the opportunity to play a role in that. And I think that's one of the most inspiring and exciting things, not only about Monad, but about crypto and nascent nascent markets that are emerging. So that's my final alpha. Go try the thing out. Let James know what you think. Let us know what you think. We'll see you in the trenches. This has been a ton of fun. Really appreciate James, you carving out some time, Keone as well. Kevin, trusty co-host. I know the community's really going to enjoy this one. And Testnet's coming out tomorrow. So hopefully this was all the info you need to get going. Appreciate it, guys.
All right, thank you.